Hey, it's Norm from Tested. Welcome to another how-to project with Frank Ippolito, brought to you by Tested Premium members. Check out our memberships. That's what allows us to make these videos, show you how to do cool things. If you've watched this series before, we've done a few projects with Frank already. We created an easy, one-sided mold for 3D printed objects to recreate those. We recreated my hand using an alginate mold. And today we want to take it one step further, a little more complex. We're doing a two-sided mold.
Two-part mold.
Two-part mold. So why would someone need to make a two-part mold?
If you have something that you can't just glue down to the table and dump rubber on, you need to have both sides of it. And maybe you want to have it so that it opens up so the piece demolds easier if there's little undercuts or complicated parts that you can't just yank it straight out.
So if someone's a prop maker, for example, they make a space pistol or an elaborate prop that doesn't have a flat bottom edge.
Or if you wanted to make a hammer or a wrench that was made out of rubber. If you want it, for a prop, like a stunt prop.
Stunt casting, a rubber prop. That's used in movies all the time. Well, we're going to recreate a prop today that I think is really cool. We're at Adam's shop, obviously, and Adam has allowed us to recreate something he made himself. It's not a space pistol, it's a space sword. It's a lightsaber. It's a lightsaber.
Did you wear this shirt on purpose today?
Happy coincidences all around. This is Luke's lightsaber from, I believe, Return of the Jedi. And what Adam told me was he made this himself based on the references from a 1995 Star Wars prop tour exhibit in San Francisco. He actually, that was right before the prequels came out, and he went to this exhibit. George Lucas donated all these props to it. Took a ton of photos, and this is one of his, I guess, the lightsaber he made back then when he was at ILM. Is this the right kind of thing that we want to create a two-part mold from?
If we were to just glue it down and dump rubber on here, it wouldn't come out of the castings really good because all these little undercuts and all these little ridges. So it's best if you want to make a two-part mold on this.
All right. So I presume, like the other molds, a one-part mold, it's going to be some type of silicone, a molding material. And then you also want to create a shell for it. So what's the first step?
First step is we are going to clay this up so that we're only going to pour rubber on the first half.
Okay.
So what we'll do is we'll take a piece of foam core, and I've decided that I want to put this on one side of the mold, so that way I'm not making a seam line across this. This will just come straight out the top.
Right. Whereas in a one-part mold, you don't have a seam line unless you cut the mold open, because it's the flat base is where you tear it out. We're going to get a seam line.
Yeah. Once you start getting into two-part molds, you have to think about how it's going to demold, where you're going to pour the resin in. Like we're going to pour the resin in this flat bottom area, which is real easy. How the resin's going to flow and where it's going to go into. Like obviously pouring it from this end is going to be pretty easy because we could just kind of roll it around and get rid of air bubbles. And then where the seam line's going to go. Is it going to cause any problems with casting, cause any problems with demolding the original? And that's one of those things that over a little bit of experience and kind of looking at other people's molds and kind of researching how molds are made, you can kind of learn how to find your parting lines and how to find undercuts. With silicone, it's really forgiving. So if I don't get the parting line right on the top edge, if it's a little bit one way or the other, it's not going to break the mold.
Okay.
So it's real easy to start off with silicone because it's forgiving.
Okay. All right. So you have the space, and you talk about creating clay. So the molds, the two halves of the mold, are created one at a time.
Yeah. We have to put clay to separate the first side that we're going to pour. Okay. And we're going to flip it over, pull that clay off, and pour the second side.
Got it.
So I'm using a water-based clay just because I can work really fast with it. You can also use soft oil-based clays. The company's not in business anymore, but it was called Clean Clay, but a bunch of other companies have made replicas of that clay now. It's an oil base, it doesn't dry out. This one's a water-based clay, it'll dry out, so I'm just gonna plow through it and get it done right now. You don't wanna let this sit necessarily overnight and come back because it'll dry and crack. So I know that I wanna split this right around about the center. So I'm just gonna build up clay up to the center.
And this is really the support structure, so that when you make the mold and you pour your silicone, which is what the mold material is going to be, that's what fills in all the nooks and crannies. The clay right now doesn't need to fill up all the nooks and crannies at all.
This clay is only to separate the halves.
Half and the bottom half.
I mean, this is a pretty simple object because it's just round. So finding the halfway point is really easy.
How important is it for it to be at exactly the halfway point, or for it to be like in a smooth line, a straight line across one of the sides?
You want this parting line to be 90 degrees out of the part. And again, this is easy because it's a cylinder, to find the center and then to make it 90 degrees from the center point. But you know, sometimes things get more complicated as the models get more complicated.
It's really soft.
Yeah, when you're using a clay to make these dividing walls, it goes quicker if you have a soft clay, which is why the clean clay stuff, the oil-based version, is also like a super soft clay. You don't necessarily want to use like a really hard like sculpting clay. You can, but it's easier to have something soft and malleable that you can just lay up these dividing walls really quickly.
Frick, I can see as you're smoothing this clay out, it's kind of bunching up closer on the edge of the model.
Yeah.
That's obviously something you don't want as a part of your mold. So.
Well, this tool, what I'm using it's just a steel spatula that I'm using just to smooth out and get the lines even. Like I'm looking at it low so I can make sure that they're
90 degrees.
They're 90 degrees and make sure it's smooth. The next thing I'm going to come in with is I have a couple of these rubber tip tools.
Okay.
And since they're rubber, they kind of flex a little bit. And those are the tools that I'll use just to go right up against the model. So that way I'm not scratching it.
Your excess.
Yeah. These work really good, like if you're molding a clay sculpture and you don't want to like mess it up. Use these real soft tools to just kind of clean up that last little bit of your parting edge.
Does it really matter what the material, the object you want to create a mold of is made out of when you're creating the mold in terms of deciding your mold material and the clay you're using?
There's different things you have to take into consideration depending on what the material is and what material you're going to mold with and what material you're molding of, like, and what you're casting of. Like, you have to think about all those things. For the most part, you know, using this water clay or a really soft oil-based clay is kind of an easy go-to.
All right, now that you've used these rubber tools to smooth out some of the edges, you're taking a sponge to it.
Yeah, I have a triangle cut makeup sponge and some water. I'm just kind of smoothing out some of these areas. You can also use a brush with some water or, you know, whatever, but I just happen to have a makeup sponge.
It needs to be silicone tight.
Yeah, you don't want any little gaps between the clay and your model because then the silicone will leak through.
So I see your seam lines, it's perfectly smooth. This is flat. You've brushed over with water. The top part, which is going to be the first part you're creating the mold of, needs to be really clean.
Yeah, the cleaner you make it, the better your mold's going to fit together.
Okay.
But there's two things we still have to do. We have to build walls to contain the silicone that we're going to pour on here.
Yep.
And then we also have to make registration so that the front side of the silicone links up with the back side.
So that's something that is specific to a multi-part mold.
Yeah.
Is registration, and that means
that if you just have two pieces of floppy silicone, they might not line up. So we want to make little keys in there so that they do line up.
All right, interlocking parts.
Yeah. So I'll take the back side of this tool, which is just a nice little rounded nub. I just dip it in a little bit of water and put it in there. It makes these little divots.
So in terms of how much registration do you need, and also how close can these keyholes be to the edge of the prop?
I don't want to put them right on top of the prop. Like, these are probably, I don't know, 3/16, quarter inch away.
Okay.
But I'm going to go all the way around because what I want is that little edge of the mold. I don't want it to shift. So if I put all these little registrations on here, it's less likely to shift and then get a step in the mold, because you don't want the mold to misalign and then your piece has a step in it.
Right.
If you keep the end of the tool a little bit wet, it keeps it from sticking, and it just makes it a nicer little dot.
How deep should these registration holes be?
I've seen people use things like bolt heads or like half spheres. You know, it depends what you want to do, like whatever you feel most comfortable with. These are probably less than a quarter inch deep. So this will get good edge registration. But once I put these walls up here, I may put another ribbon of registration on there, just so that it has multiple things that kind of make the silicone hold together.
And the silicone will want to grab each other, the two halves. It'll want to grab in the registration holes. That's why it doesn't need to be so deep.
Yeah, it'll help. It just helps for alignment. So what I'll do is I'll just take a piece of foam core to serve as a straight edge.
Okay.
And my little metal tool. And I'm just going to cut this excess clay off.
Is this clay reusable?
Yeah, I've seen people take it and reuse it. Once you put crystal clear on it and you start putting rubber in it, then sometimes it'll get contaminated. But I've seen people pick that stuff out and reuse it. It's really cheap. I think a 50-pound box is like 20 bucks.
Wow.
So it's not expensive at all.
All right, time to add some walls.
So the next thing,
Hot glue.
brought my hot glue gun this time. So the next thing we'll do is we'll just hot glue these foam core strips to the sides to build walls.
Goodness for foam core. It's like the best material. All right, your walls are in. I noticed you're trying to seal that clay against the wall so the silicone doesn't fall around the edges,
Yeah.
because that's unnecessary. And you really want a tight seal, I guess, between the foam core, the clay, and then also the prop.
Yeah, you don't want silicone leaking anywhere you don't need it. So I still have a little bit of space here between this dot registration and my walls.
So what am I not make more dot registration?
Well, I'm not going to do dot registration. I'm going to do like ribbons this time.
Ah.
So I have a little loop tool, and if I make a little wavy line, that just adds another little bit of registration.
It's like the first layer of locking and then the second layer of locking.
Yep, this is more kind of broad stroke registration.
All right, before you pour the silicone, you're gonna do one more thing.
I want to seal this water clay with some crystal clear.
Okay.
So I'm just going to put a couple of light coats on there. It'll go on the model too, but it's fine. This is a glossy model. If you want something, if you're going to mold something that's got a matte finish, you could always hit it with some matte finish from Krylon or dulling spray. Both of those things also work if you need to take the shine off of something. But this is just to seal it, just to help the water clay pull out of the silicone easier.
Okay. That clear coat is set.
Yep, all dry.
All right, and of course, you can always rub it off the prop later with alcohol.
Yeah, you can take a little bit of alcohol and take anything off.
So you're not doing any permanent damage to anything.
Nope.
And then the silicone. So this is a very familiar silicone.
Yeah, this is 20T, which is the same stuff that we use to mold the hand.
Cast the hand.
Cast the hand, yes,
Right.
correct.
So
Yeah.
where that project, this is the silicone to make the fake hand.
Yeah.
This is actually going to be the mold material.
Yes, you can use materials for molding or casting. It just depends what you want to do with it. So they're kind of universal.
And silicone, of course, sticks only silicone.
Yep, so it won't stick to any of this.
Awesome.
So I've weighed out 2 batches of silicone already. I put a little bit of blue pigment in one of them, just so when I stir it, I can see that it's all mixed really good.
Okay.
And as soon as I mix it, I'm gonna run over to the evacuator over there and I'm gonna put this whole thing in the vacuum chamber. What that does is it sucks all the air that I've whipped into it when I'm mixing it. So that way when I pour it, the only air that's gonna be in there is stuff that's just gonna naturally rise out. For the most part, people aren't gonna have a huge deal without evacuating the silicone. I know that I'm probably gonna wanna pressure cast these things, which means I'm gonna put this mold into a pressure tank and put positive pressure on the resin when I cast it. And if I have a silicone that has that hasn't been degassed, which is what this is called, then it'll get little divots and it'll have an imperfect casting. So I want to evacuate the silicone if I'm going to do a pressure casting.
That was a fast 6 minutes.
Fast 6 minutes.
All right, half the mold is now poured in this frame. We have to wait about 30 minutes, but let's talk about this process. How did you know exactly how much silicone to pour in here for this half?
That's simple math.
Simple math.
Length times width times height.
Right, in inches.
In inches, times 18.5, which is what we figured out a volumetric cubic inch of silicone is. It's a number we came up with when I was working at McFarlane Toys. And that gives us how many grams of total material we need. Gave me about 1,900 grams for this. I took a little bit out because the Lightsaber takes up a little bit of it, so I guessed about 1,800 grams.
Wow.
And then I divide that by 2, and that's how many grams in each cup I weighed out.
That's brilliant. Let's recap that. Figure out the volume of the box by inches.
Yes.
So for example, if it was a 2x2x2 box, that's 8 cubic inches.
Yeah.
Multiply that by what you figured out for silicone, 18.5. I'm not gonna do that math. And that is in grams because you want mass.
Yes.
And so you weigh out that, and that is your total silicone volume.
Yep.
And then you divide that by 2 for each of the halves, part A and part B.
Correct. And then you can estimate out how much volume you think you're gonna lose in the part that's in there.
Very cool, and that came out just about right. So we'll come back in 30 minutes and do the other half.
Yep.
"30 minutes later, half of it's done. Let's examine the silicone. Oh, that's rock solid.
Well, rubber solid.
Rubber solid. So this Smooth-On Mold Star 20T, 30 minutes set time, about a 6-minute working time.
Yes.
So you're gonna make really quick casts or molds with this thing.
Yeah.
But if you're gonna do a project in one day, it's the right thing to use.
That's how to do it.
All right, so what's next to get the other side?
So what I want to do is I want to take these walls off and not destroy them because I'm going to use them again to pour the other side. So
we need to tear one side off, and just pop off that silicone.
Yeah. So I'm just going to kind of carefully pull them off.
It's like baking a cake. You have layers of things.
Yeah, why not?
All right, all 4 sides are off. Examine it. You have this top layer of silicone. Great. And then the clay on the bottom. And it's time to just flip it around?
Yes. So I'll take another piece of foam core just because it's clean. I'll flip this guy over.
Okay.
And pull that off.
Ah.
And then carefully just kind of take the clay off. I don't want to dislodge the Lightsaber from the silicone. I just want to take the clay off.
And the clay is still malleable. It's still putty-like. It hasn't hardened yet. And yeah, so you're holding the prop down and then just tearing that off bit by bit. I like the registration marks. So Frank, the thing we're molding right now is fairly, even though it's a 2-sided mold, it's still a fairly simple object, cylindrical. I imagine if someone sculpted something with more detail, with overhangs, larger pieces, would it still be the same process?
It's basically the same process. You just have to determine where your parting line is going to be. But again, that goes to how you want to cast it, how the mold gets flipped over, how the part comes out of it. There's a lot of different kind of variables to that, but for basics, like just molding 101, doing a 2-part, this is a good way to start. I've also seen a lot of people that instead of using this foam core, I've seen them use Lego bricks to build their walls. That way the walls are kind of the same size every time. The only thing I don't like about that is a lot of times it'll leave like those little brick lines, and I just like nice clean molds. It's just a personal preference, but those things work really well also if you want something that's reusable, so you don't have to like waste foam core all the time.
Got it.
I've also made mold walls out of like wood. If I'm doing a larger mold, the weight of the silicone could become a factor, and you don't want it to like bend over the walls of the foam core. So you could build the box out of wood also. I mean, basically there's a bazillion ways to do any of these things. This is just like one version, one kind of intro to how to do it. And then you can look up all the different methods and figure out which one might be best for your project.
So right now you're scraping off this clay, and just like when you were preparing the other side for the silicone mold pour, you want this to be real clean.
Yeah.
Not just on top of that prop, but also on top of the bottom half.
Mm-hmm.
And break out that sponge.
Mm-hmm. Once I get most of the big chunks of clay out, I'll use a little bit of water and the sponge to rinse it all off.
All right, that looks like a pretty clean mold in the bottom there. The model's clean. Of course, we use some of Adam's tools here to blow off any of the excess residue, but you can just patting it down with paper, cleaning out the mold.
Yeah, make it dry. Mm-hmm. So next thing we want to do is put these walls back up, and we'll just kind of reuse all of this stuff.
Okay.
So I'm pretty much just checking the corners to make sure that silicone isn't going to leak out between the walls. Just because these are kind of repurposed pieces of foam core. Mm-hmm. They're a little crooked, so I just want to make sure they're all sealed up. All right, so that's all put back together, and then we'll get it a little spray of crystal clear again. The crystal clear is going to make a barrier on the silicone so the silicone doesn't stick to itself.
Got it. That's
you can also use spray releases and stuff.
So when you're casting, will you need crystal clear every time you make a cast to make sure the two sides don't stick?
No, because the mold will be cured and be separate. It's a good idea to have some mold release to, to cast your piece in there. The mold will last a little bit longer if you use a release.
That's a pretty perfect fit, Frank.
Yeah.
Well, you did the math.
Did the math.
Wow, you have a little bit extra. We were just saying earlier, it might be good practice to maybe make a one-sided mold. So you can just, if easy to pour something into if you have extra. You can work on two projects at the same time.
The other thing you can do is a lot of times I'll leave this rubber in the bottom of a bucket and you can pull it out and then you can use it as like a Bondo mixing pad or things like that. So this is still useful.
Silicone, again, nothing sticks to it, so it's almost like a flat surface you could work on.
When I was doing the evacuator, you put the vacuum on and it rises up and it starts bubbling. And then I had to let some air in a little bit just because it would have overflowed the bucket. So you let the air in just a little bit and then eventually it'll collapse in on itself. And that's when you know that it's completely evacuated. So it rises up and then it drops back down. So when you mix up silicone or any kind of material and you want to put it in an evacuator, you always want to have a bucket that's at least twice the size.
Twice the size of how much you have.
The volume that you have in there.
Well, 30 minutes for this set.
Yep, then we'll open it up.
We'll open it up and cast something. Frank, we got a mold.
This is done.
Wow. It's filled up so perfectly.
Giant block of rubber.
Giant block of 2 halves of rubber. So
now we open it like Christmas.
Demolding.
God, it's Christmas. Don't you want to help open the presents?
Yes. Oh, can I? Always ask permission. Oh, it's so... there it goes. So we can just tear apart this wall. Tear down this foam core wall.
Foam core walls of oppression.
Yes. All right. There we go. 2 colors, 2 halves.
I'm gonna just take these.
It's why you don't use Lego blocks.
Yeah, because if it's Lego blocks, you get all kinds of lines there. These are just all nice and smooth.
It's an aesthetic thing.
So then,
It's all cleaned up. Oh, you just tear it apart.
You just separate it. That's it.
Thanks to that clear coat. Oh, look at the registration. And it's birthing a lightsaber.
So there you go. That's the 2 halves.
Oh, that's great.
Oops.
Look at these negatives. Wow. All right, let's check the lightsaber. Still looks good. See some of the clay here. This will just give this a nice rub down with alcohol. Clean up the molds there.
So there we go. Now we have the 2 halves of the molds, but we need to fill it somewhere. If you notice, I didn't put any registration right down here at the end.
Because that's where you're going to pour in whatever you're going to cast.
Yep, we're going to pour. So I'm just going to take this. I'm just going to cut a little channel.
Okay. Doesn't need to be that big, right? Does it matter which side?
I'm going to cut both sides.
Both sides.
You want to kind of plan these molds beforehand. This is a fairly simple, straightforward thing. So to put the pour spout down here where it's a flat place that you can just cut that off and sand it flat makes it really easy. If you have a more complicated thing that has details on all ends, you have to kind of pick and choose where you're going to put your pour spout.
As we talked about earlier, you chose it here because the gravity will help and you'll be able to swirl whatever you cast inside to make sure you have no air bubbles. So before we get to casting, do we need to do any cleanup on the inside of the mold?
Yeah, it'd probably be good to wipe it down with a little bit of rubbing alcohol just to get any residue out of here. Like there might be a little bit of residue from the crystal clear or a little bit of residue from just little bits of clay that might still be in here somewhere. If I was making a more production mold, I would spend a lot more time on that wall to make it perfect. We're gonna have to clean up the piece when we pull it out. But
flashing.
Yeah, but that's just all about spending more time on the mold, spending more time on that wall.
So the better you get that wall, that line between the first half and the second half, the smoother you make that clay, the closer it is to the prop, the less work you put on yourself afterward in terms of the cleanup of your cast. So now we have the molds, it's time to cast something in them. With a silicone mold, what can you cast? What type of materials?
You can cast urethanes, epoxies, polyesters, like all kinds of things. If you're gonna cast silicone, you have to use certain releases because silicone sticks to silicone.
When you mean a release, you mean like a spray or application that coats each of the sides?
Yeah, and different releases work with different products. You got to look at all the information and stuff like that. If I was going to cast silicone into here, I would probably use like Ease Release 300 or just dish soap. You can take dish soap and just work it up into a lather, and that's usually a good enough release. You just want to create a barrier.
So what are we casting in here today?
Well, these molds are floppy, as silicone is. So what we did is we cut some pieces of wood, so when we put these together, we'll strap it with wood and that'll keep it rigid and it'll keep it even pressure. Because I don't want to take a mold and I don't want to clamp it like here and here and here, because then it'll pinch it. So if you put it on a piece of wood, it'll give it even pressure all the way around when you strap it together. Nice.
And looks like we have some resin over there.
Yep, let me just rubber band these together.
So when we're talking about the proper care of a mold, like this mold using silicone, you said it will last up to maybe like 50 times. You can cast them if you treat it well.
If you treat it well, you know, if you use resins that aren't going to get super hot and burn out the mold.
That means a longer setting resin.
Usually, yeah. These are platinum silicone, so this one will probably last longer than like a tin-based silicone. So just, you know, things like that can help you make a mold last longer. Using spray releases, you can use like Ease Release 200 or a lot of other things just to help, you know, keep down the wear and tear on the molds.
Got it.
So that's all strapped up. I brought some resin. This is Smoothcast 45D. 45 is the durometer on a D scale, which goes back to all of our you know, different things.
So when we talked about this here, this is 20T, and that's 20 on the T scale.
No.
No?
The T stands for translucent, but it's 20 on an A scale. A scale is for soft things, D scale is for rigid things, and then there's a 00 scale, which is for gels.
Real soft.
Really
mushy
soft.
things.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'll mix up some resin. Not 100% sure how much goes in there. We'll eyeball it. There's all kinds of ways that you can estimate how much resin to go in there. You could put rice in there, or sand, or water, or all kinds of things to estimate it. We're just going to go for it.
Okay. Eyeballing by volume.
So because it has all these ridges in
Yeah.
it, I'm going to pour in some, and I'm going to kind of roll it around, which will kind of coat the inside of the mold and kind of help it so that it hopefully doesn't trap as many air bubbles. Now we evacuated this resin, so we could also put it in a pressure tank, but Adam doesn't have a pressure tank here.
It's okay just to let it wait and have, maybe minor air bubbles in the resin. Give it the textured look. If you're using a resin that's clear, you can mix colors in it, or you can just finish it later. All right, you've poured in the resin. This resin, you had about a 5-6 minute work time.
Yeah.
And then another 30 minutes of cure time.
Yeah, and you can get resins with different work times. This just happened to be the one that I grabbed.
Okay. So let's come back in 30 minutes and then pop this open and see if we have a Lightsaber.
Cool.
Frank, I'm so excited, I'm so excited, I'm so excited.
It's like Christmas all over again.
No, let's break this mold open. So a lot of rubber bands added. I noticed that you stacked more rubber bands at the bottom.
Yeah.
Because that's where whatever you're gonna cast this in, like resin, silicone, gravity is gonna push that to the bottom.
Yeah, you're gonna have hydraulic pressure, and so you're probably gonna want a couple more at the bottom.
And it's okay if some stuff seeps out in the very beginning. You have a
First casting out of the mold, you have to learn some of the nuances of how the mold runs.
Right.
So we might open this and we might go, oh, there's some air bubbles. We need to do something different next time.
Half it could be empty.
Yeah.
Never. It's Schrodinger's casting right now.
So there we go.
Good. That looks pretty good.
Maybe next time we'll add some pigment to the resin.
Yep. Or try maybe a different material.
Yeah.
Urethane. But this is, it's a little warm.
It's a little warm. It's still not all the way done. But
this here's our resin lightsaber casting. And let's get up close here because you can see right here, just some of that flashing.
Tiny bit, not very much.
Bit. And this can be cleaned up.
Yeah.
Just sand it down.
Sand it down, take a file.
Yep, no problem.
There's a little bit of air bubbles
here.
up there. But again, when we run the next one, maybe when I put that last little bit in there, I roll this end. Because see, I rolled all these and there's not really much of any air trapped up here, which is where I was worried. But I didn't roll this last little bit. So when I do that, just roll the mold a little bit. And
so learn the nuances of every mold you're making. So.
But for a first casting, I'd say that's, B+.
B+. Way to grade yourself. What can you do to finish something like this kind of resin?
Well, you'd want to sand it and maybe primer it, and then you can paint it with just about whatever you want. If we were going to give it a finish like this, we might want to send it to get vacuum metallized or chromed.
You don't need a machine. You can machine one and make a
lot of copies. You can make a rubber one, and that way you can hit people with it.
If only Luke knew it was so easy. I'm beginning Return of the Jedi. Thank you so much, Frank,
Thanks for having
teaching
me.
us two-part molds. Now we have this mold, so we can just experiment different materials, and we can make different castings. And thank you, Tested Premium members, for bringing this video series to Tested. We'll have more how-tos, more projects in the future. Subscribe to our YouTube channel if you haven't yet, and check us out on tested.com. Frank Ippolito's website, frankippolito.com. I'm Norm. It's Frank. See you next time. Joey, you can add special effects to this, right?
Yeah.
Give me a lightsaber. I'll give you the sound effects. You do the visual effects. Make it green. Make sure it's green, just like Luke's.